During my i3 challenge, I mentioned that I had another challenge going on that would prevent me from using i3 that week. That's because, after doing game development for an evening or two, I decided that I wanted to participate in the Linux Game Jam. Let's talk a little bit about my experience, some of the tools I used, and some just general thoughts overall. I also had another idea about something that I wanted to try, one kind of stretch goal, if you will, for the game if I could get the game itself working. And I'll talk about that later in the video, so keep tuned to see what that was and if I succeeded. Your first question may be, why did you sign up for a game jam? And, well, to be fair, I asked myself that a couple of times over the course of the 10 days of the jam, between trying to do this and YouTube and, well, basically learning game development. So I've always been interested in video game development. I even looked at it briefly in the past. But at the time, I really didn't have enough conceptual knowledge of programming to really absorb what I was trying to learn. I mentioned in a previous video, I've been doing 100 days of code. Day 60, I decided to look at game dev for the first time. I checked it out a day or two later, and then maybe one more evening, and that was really it. But all of a sudden on day 66, I see the Linux Game Jam pop up. At first, I tried to talk myself out of it and say, next year I'll be ready for this, I can put in some time, I can really try to work to understand game development. But within 15 minutes, I had talked myself into doing it, and I had signed up. Since I hadn't known the jam was starting, I had no concept for a game and immediately began thinking about what kind of game I wanted to make. My initial thought was a action platformer with robot enemies, and, the story was an AI trying to delete the Linux source code or something. I mean, it's a Linux game jam after all. Saturday morning came around, and I stared at my screen for a couple of hours in analysis paralysis. I took a break for lunch, and when I came back, I decided to just scrap the entire idea and really focus on learning as much as I could about game development. Since I had Monday off, I had the rest of Saturday and part of Sunday and all of Monday to really focus on learning. And even if I finished up my learning on Monday, that would still give me about a week to complete the game. So my tool of choice was Godot 4, and I knew a little bit about it. I've looked at it in the past, like I say, but nothing extensive. But it's open source, it works on Linux, and I can easily export to Linux, all of which were major pluses to me. One recommendation I have, if you want to learn Godot, particularly you want to learn GDScript, then a YouTube channel called GDQuest actually has an app called Learn GDScript from Zero, and this is an open source app that's free. They also have paid courses if you're looking to do something more like that. I had previously bought one of their courses, and unfortunately it was still on Godot 3.5, so it wouldn't really work because there were some key changes in 4 that made it a bit more difficult to translate some of that. But the Learn GDScript from Zero app was a great option to really kind of take what I knew conceptually about programming and try to translate some of that into game dev specifically when it comes to GDScript, the language. I ended up finding a different tutorial and started working through that. And generally, I felt like I was understanding what was happening conceptually, like I was understanding why things were happening. I wasn't just able to follow along with the code. I was able to think of ways to try to extend the code and, do things sometimes earlier than I would be doing it in the tutorial. After the intense session Saturday afternoon and Sunday evening and Monday morning, around lunch on Monday, I was like, okay, let's start working on this game. I had pared my entire idea back to a simple platformer, and we would see what other features I actually wanted to add. But with all good platformers, the first thing you need is a solid jump, and I found a cool video that actually talked about how to make a useful jump in Godot, and kind of used that as my basis for starting off. I worked on this and some other things for a while, and then ultimately decided to try to look for assets. I kind of found some, but I wasn't really feeling them. As I kept working on the game, I went from the jump to adding coyote time. So coyote time is when you run off a ledge and you're able to still jump for a couple of frames after that. It's, really designed to help the player if their input is slightly delayed. I also added jump buffering, and what this is if you press jump just before you hit the ground within a couple of frames, then you'll actually go ahead and jump once you're actually on the ground. Not doing this can make it seem like the game ate the player's input, Both coyote time and buffer jumping are two things that really make the game feel a lot better to players, because if you don't actually add these, the game can feel unfair between, lag from your monitor, lag from potentially the game running, lag from input, and all that stuff together. From here, I just needed to add some enemies. It took way longer than it should to get the hitbox and hurtbox for the enemy and player to cooperate like I needed to, but I finally got that figured out, and I created a couple of levels. I only ended up with 2 levels as I just kind of ran out of steam by the end of the week. I was pushing through learning so much. I was still going back and trying to learn more as the week went on. By the end, I just, between that and work and trying to post a YouTube video, I just decided that ultimately I was gonna call it good at 2 levels. One thing I think that I will try if I end up doing another game is to actually find another way to create levels. So maybe that's graph paper, or maybe it's some other program. I'm not sure yet, but I do want to try to think about that, because I don't feel like trying to use a tileset in Godot is the easiest way to do it. The tool itself is good, but it's probably not the right medium for me to try to work through designing a level. Oh, and yeah, my game is nothing great. I think the jump feels pretty solid, but that's about it. Its levels are kind of weird. It's an interesting way that I've done things. I've tried to add things like a checkpoint system and things like that. Most of it worked pretty well. It's playable, but it's not great. But if you want to check it out, I will have links to it below. But I would encourage you to also check out some of the other entries in the Game Jam, because there were a good number and some pretty cool stuff in there. And I mentioned I had to use assets from other people. I would like to learn pixel art at some point. I have a couple of ideas in mind for potentially projects even here on this channel that can involve some pixel art. So that'll probably be something I focus on learning as we move forward. So I mentioned the kind of stretch goal for the game. My idea was it would be awesome to be able to actually play this game on the Steam Deck. And while it's not available on Steam, there is a way to sideload it on the game with the DevTools. And I was able to do that successfully. And here it actually is running on the Steam Deck. To me, it was really cool to get this playing on the Steam Deck, as, it's kind of its own little self-contained unit. It feels different, as opposed to playing something on a PC where, you play your demo when you're trying to test things out. You're actually playing it on another device that feels a lot like a console. Ultimately, I learned a lot in 10 days, and I generally enjoyed the process. There's a lot more that I need to learn if I want to actually take this further, but it was a fun experience. Here are the questions for you. What are your thoughts? Have you ever done a game jam? Or have you learned any game development? I've considered doing more videos about this if I keep exploring game dev. If this is something you think you'd be interested in, feel free to sound off in the comments below. Lastly, I would say, if you end up checking out any games in the Game Jam, please leave feedback, because that's really amazing for smaller projects like these. And like I said, I think there's some pretty cool stuff in here. As always, thanks for watching, have a great day, and I will see you next time.